Well, we are here again with another wonderful writer of Querying the Bible series. And this year, as we've said in the previous video, that we are querying the book of Job. And joining us for our writer's interview is Shauna. And to introduce you to the world, Shauna, what should people know about you?
Hmm. So my name's Shauna Bowman. I use they them pronouns. I'm an artist and a pastor in Chicago. And I love this idea, this project of bringing our queer wisdom to these stories.
Yeah, it's always a great gift during this time. And we are in Pride Month. And it was one of the reasons why we decided to do this to offer up a space for a different commentary on the biblical text when it comes to, we always hear from the same people and we always hear from the
Mhm.
same experience. And so opening up this space for our queer and trans and non-binary folk and all the people who are a part of that community. And so Shauna, when I say queering the Bible, what is exactly does that mean to you?
I When I think about the language of queer, it's a word I have come an identity I have come to embrace sort of as the most genuine, I think, like, sense of, my identity, and when I think about it, in terms of, like, an identity marker, I think there are some really similar ways I think about it as, like, what we're bringing to a reading of the text, right? And so, for me, those things really go together. So when I think about queer identity, for me, it's not just about an individual identity, it's about a collective identity, and it's not only about, like, my own personal lived experience, but also it's political, it's, um, around, thinking and living and being, in ways that are not just outside the status quo in, like, an oppositional way, but that are, like, more expansive, more fluid, more curious, more filled with wonder, and so in that way, I think a queer lens or queer reading of the text is an invitation to wonder. It's an invitation to think expansively, to ask what if, and then, like, what if again and again and again, so that we hold lots of readings and stories next to each other. And that's a way that we queer the text, is that we aren't about the business of a right or wrong or a binary or even, like, the best reading, but with, like, a playfulness and a curiosity.
Yeah, I often wonder about that too. I feel like what if you're in the queer community or and you identify as such, sometimes we always are seen as or we have to be put on the defensive to like defend our
Mhm.
humanity and kind of and sometimes
Yeah.
that's worth doing that, but oftentimes we don't get to be in spaces to where we're actually
Yeah.
creating and constructing and building upon what does it actually
Yeah.
mean for us to be a community or a queer community or have a lens. And so I really do appreciate that it goes beyond because usually when we talk about the status quo, it is always in a defensiveness of where we're going against
Mhm.
some kind of certain standard or construct.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
don't give ourselves permission to go beyond that and build
Mhm.
something different. And for folks out there, that's called deconstruction. Like we're deconstructing a lot of things, and oftentimes we don't provide space for us to construct things and to
That's right.
live in that
Yeah.
creativity. And
Yeah.
and that to me is something that I get really excited about when we do this series
Mhm.
because something new comes of this and
Yeah.
something different and curious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something that we say at Friendship, where I'm the pastor, is we're not we're not whole yet until we're all here, including our queer selves and queer community, and that our insights and experiences and theological perspectives add to the wholeness of the community. And I think that what we've really tried to do, and I've moved in this way, and then as a pastor, something that I really has become important to me is to invite people into a space of celebration and liberation. I think we've been so in the church that for so long we've been required, forced, or made to feel like we have to beg or ask for permission or be invited rather than simply claiming our goodness and really insisting on a celebratory theology for ourselves. I sometimes say like we've been forced into the role of Oliver Twist, where we're like, please, may I have a little bit more? To the point where it's damaged our imaginations and the fullness of our community. And so for me, this kind of an invitation to like queer the text in a joyful and celebratory way, particularly a text like this that's so hard, right? The
Yeah.
text of Job um is so in keeping with that for the kind of space that we've been trying to create at Friendship.
Yeah, and so speaking of Job, it is a book that doesn't always you don't always think about Job and think about joy and celebration. It is one of those books that does speak a lot about like the questions around suffering and kind of like why does bad things happen to good people or like people who think
Yeah.
they're good and all these questions we have around suffering. And one of the reasons why I really do like Job is because it's one of those books that it doesn't give us an answer. It kind of makes us ask more
Mhm.
questions. But I wonder about Job for you, like as you approach the text,
Yeah.
as you approach kind of seeing it through this queer lens. What are some things that are coming up from you when it comes to Job? And by the way, Shauna is writing on the second chapter of Job.
Yeah. That's right. A couple things. First of all, I love the book of Job because in the same way that my favorite liturgical days of the year are like Ash Wednesday and Good Friday, right? Like I am a emo kid at heart, child of the 80s. And so there's just so much I think richness and resonance and um unvarnished honesty in the book of Job. And even though it's a piece of our wisdom literature and it's an allegory, there's so much to hang our human experience on in it, I think. Um, and when I think about it, particularly from the experience that many of us have as queer folk, I as I was reading the second chapter of Job and thinking about this, particularly through this idea of what does it mean to queer a text like this, Job really stood out to me as like a queer hero in this book, right? In this chapter, because the this idea that there's this accusatory force, right? This adversarial force that has decided to like use everything within their power to dehumanize and to strip Job of their humanity and righteousness. And what Job does in response is like holds fast, right? Like isn't 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 stripped, right? Like is put through the ringer, but holds fast to their sense of integrity and identity. And they're like, no, I know
Hmm.
who I am and who I belong to. And for me, I think that is such a hard truth to hold when it feels as if the world is set against you, right? And I think that for some of us anyway, who have had to really fight for our spaces and had to hear really bad and harmful theology, really misuses of the text against our very
Hmm.
identities. Like there's something here in Job that offers us a pathway to steadfastness. And that's not to say, I think where we want to be really careful is like the terrible saying like if it doesn't kill you it makes you stronger, like
Yeah.
that is not what I'm saying. Like Job's not deserving, no one's deserving, right? And it's not, um it's not that Job's faithful because he was put through this, it's that Job's faithfulness perseveres,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just faith in God. Job has faith in himself, right? He's like, "No, I know I'm a person of integrity," right? Like, you can't take that away from me. And I think that's really remarkable, um, as we think about, I mean, even in just chapter 2, how much he's already facing.
I know. He goes through a lot in a very quick amount of time. And I've been thinking about this, and I heard this growing up, like God doesn't give you the things that you can't handle, or like all those kind of the cliches or those
Trite
sayings
sayings,
that.
yeah.
And it's often that we have this like very like suffering servant model kind of instilled in us, like if
Mhm,
like we live
mhm.
this life, and if we it's kind of like if we're not suffering, then what are we doing, like. But suffering becomes like the default instead of what we're saying about like this steadfastness and this like joy of being who we are, like, and nobody deserves suffering. It comes after like, well, he must have done something, or that's it's getting like payback. And that's often something with semi attached to queer identity, in that it has been classified as demonic or like satanic and all these other terrible definitions of that, but also kind of like a burden to bear in a way, even if people are very
Mhm.
meaningful and saying like, "Oh, like I feel
Yeah,
sorry for you because you have to go through a lot because of your identity," and all those things. And we never talk, and people never, well, they do sometimes, but it's very rare that someone's just like, "Oh, that's awesome. Like that must be a joyful thing for you to live into," instead of saying,
yeah,
"Oh my gosh,
yeah.
you're going to have to suffer," and all the and that's not our fault. It is the constructs that society has put on us, that is
Right.
their fault. And that's what makes me also, as you were talking, I really thought about that too, of the things that I also heard growing up and those kind of
Mhm.
sayings too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to read this text at the intersection too of, if we're gonna think through a queer lens, but also through a disability lens, right? And so at that intersection of, because that happens, I know, to a lot of our friends in the disability rights community around these assumptions that, um, even when we make like, um, suffering or a sense of, marginalization or disability out to be like, oh, you're so heroic, right? Like, it's
Mhm.
a burden, or it's this special overcoming, and the reality is like, it's the, like you said, the constructs and the, um shape that we've taken as a society that's the problem, right? Like that the like queerness in and of itself is, beautiful, right? And part of the like spectrum and beauty of human experience, um differently abled, disabled, and able-bodied bodies all are part of the fabric of humanity. It's that we've constructed environments that are a burden,
Mhm.
right? It's the environment itself, right? It's the structure itself. Um, and it makes me think about that in terms of the book of Job, and all of these constructed realities that are changing around Job, and that and the reality is that they have massive impacts to Job's life and well-being, health, and safety. Um, but Job is not the cause of them, right? And I think that there is like a weird hopefulness in that, right? Because it's an invitation to tell the truth about the structures that we're swimming in, and the impacts that they have.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think that this series can open us up to kind of not necessarily the default. We're changing a little bit of how people default in their thinking in some ways of, well,
Yeah.
let's listen to this experience and actually see it for what it is, instead of all these like preconceived notions and preconceived things that we've all been taught growing up, and how society teaches us to think, and all those things. And especially now, in a time such as this, we're kind of in a cluster of
Mm.
of a time of queer rights, and specifically for our trans siblings, are under attack. A lot of hate, specifically when it comes to legislation and politics in this country. And so a lot of queer
Yeah.
people, a lot of trans people are feeling a lot of things right now. And so I have been
Mhm.
asking, and will continue to ask our writers, what would you say to our queer community out there? Because yeah, we're going through some things right now.
Yeah. There's a there's on the one hand, I wanna say things like, we are whole and beautiful and beloved, and that you can't legislate that away. And also, I think the wisdom of Job's friends in this chapter, they don't always get it right, but I'm grateful to have chapter 2 where they make their first appearance, and what they know to do is sit with Job. And I think that what we cannot do is be divided from one another. We have to stay in solidarity with one another across our queer identities, in solidarity with our friends who are people of color, in solidarity with our siblings fighting for their lives and safety and liberation across the globe, and to like see that we are part of a fabric of a liberative story. And sometimes there aren't words, but we have to show up for each other. I think that the moment we fall into the trap of like being divided so that we can be conquered by this administration is when we do start to lose. And I think Job's friends come and they just sit and they're present and they see him and they believe him. And I think that's what we really need from one another.
Yeah. Well, Shauna, I appreciate that. And I needed to hear that. And I hope whoever's watching this, I hope that brings you, hope. And I hope you sit with people, and yeah, we have to do this together. And that is something that we're just going to have to learn how to do. But I appreciate
Yeah.
you and all the work that you do. And thanks for doing this interview with us. And thanks for writing on Queering the Bible, Queering Joe for Unbound.
Yeah. You're welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, you can go and find Queering Job at justiceunbound.org/queering the Bible/Job. And all those websites will be in the description, and it'll be up on your screen too. And so y'all go enjoy the series, and we'll see you again for another interview.
Yeah. Thank you.